Morrisby's personality questionnaire is called the Morrisby Type Indicator. It's 32 questions in length. The first 16 questions start off with, others would say that I am. The last 16 start with, I would prefer to. The response scale is 5 options, and you can be in the middle if students respond with a particular response style, so either saying usually to one end or the other or being in the middle, which is more normal, then a message will appear encouraging them to vary their responses. These 32 items are rolled up into 4 scales, and a scale would be, in this case, extrovert, introvert. So there are 4 scales, and their responses are presented with this green bar. The longer the bar, the stronger the preference for operating in that way. So this person has a fairly strong preference for operating in a judging fashion and a fairly strong preference for sensing. Now, the scores and their strength are rolled up, and one of 81 descriptors is presented. This individual has the type of the facilitator. Using one word or short descriptors can be quite misleading, so it's always a good idea to read the longer descriptor. And it's also important to make sure you understand that the descriptors behind the labels on the scales make sense to you. So introvert, for example, which can have a negative connotation in some Western cultures, they focus on their inner world of ideas, thoughts and deliberations, which may be different to your definition of introversion. And judging is all around being comfortable with a well-ordered, structured environment, not making judgments on somebody. So it's important to read the full label. Now, although there are 81 different types within this model, you'll be presented with 25, 30 of them most of the time. And that's because some of these types would be for people who are really extreme in 2, 3, 4 of the scales, either one end or the other. And we just don't see them appearing very often. So I would expect 25, 30 or so would be the number that you'd be seeing regularly. Now, many of you might recognise this model and be thinking, that's the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's not. Like the MBTI and perhaps 60 other less well-known questionnaires, it is based on Jungian typology theory, which was expanded by Myers and Briggs, but it is not the Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's much shorter than that. There's only 32 questions here, and it also operates in a different way. So a Jungian typology questionnaire is looking at a scale, and the theory says that you've got to be one or the other. So it's a dichotomy. You can't be in the middle. You have to be one or the other. Very much like a sorting hat. The issue with that in reality, particularly with younger people, is an awful lot of them will appear down the middle. And we then have to find a way of kind of like doing a tie break to work out where they are. And they might end up being thinking, but actually when you talk to them, they might say, maybe I'm feeling more often than not. And we don't have the luxury of having that conversation with students all the time. So the questionnaire has to be robust enough, but it doesn't have to be backed up by a one-to-one unpacking by somebody who's skilled in interpreting personality questionnaires. So what Morrisby have done is they've moved away from the dichotomy, and they've used the same typology model, but they've applied normal, what we call scale scores to it. So with Morrisby, you have a scale where you're an extrovert or an introvert, and you can be in the middle. Whereas with a typology, you couldn't be in the middle. You'd have to be one or the other. And this is why this additional gradation means that we don't require as many questions to work out which side somebody's on, and it means that we have 81 descriptors rather than in the MBTI model they have 16. Another point I'd make is when you see a score on extroversion, you might think that's it, but actually you could delve into what extroversion is and find out a whole series of subscales which could be measured separately and averaged up to extroversion. So these subscales could be something like enthusiastic, gregarious, initiating action. And you can imagine somebody being strong on one of those, but less strong on the other. But still, when it's averaged up, they come out on the extroversion side. So be aware that this is measuring 4 scales, but there are many questionnaires out there that might measure 20 or 30 or more scales. I'm going to go through extroversion, introversion in more detail, but there is a downloadable summary of the scale descriptors, and I'd encourage you to take that from the training course. So, extroversion, introversion, all about how you are energized. So extroverts prefer to draw their energy from the world around them, from doing, from involvement in external events and contact with people. But it doesn't necessarily mean you're socially confident. Introversion prefer to draw energy from the internal world through quiet reflection, focusing on inner thoughts and ideas. But introverts aren't always shy. They might be very socially confident. And then a series of bullet points. External environment, contemplation, introspection. Talk through, think through, best by doing or discussing, best by reflection, breadth versus depth of interest, speak first, reflect later versus the opposite. Now, when we look at this, I think you can imagine a situation where you sit down with a student and they say, yeah, I do like talking through things. I do think I learn best by doing, and I like discussing it, which is kind of talking through. But I do have a tendency to speak and act first, but I've got really strong, deep interests, few deep interests. That would not be at all incongruous with the definition of extroversion. It'd be rare to find somebody who ticks every single descriptor of that, and that's because of these subscales. Right, I'm now going to flick through very quickly the remaining 3 scales. Intuition, sensing, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving. Right, we'll now go and have a look at an actual Morrisby profile on the Morrisby Manager site. So I'm now looking at the MTI within a sample student. This person is called personality sample. And they've come up as the ally, as a type, with a descriptor and the range of scores with a longer text descriptor down here. One of the things I like is working with either written text or the bullet points, the summary points about who the ally is likely to be. Now, students can at any time retake the questionnaire, and it does have a memory, so if I go through this very, very quickly, it will have a memory of what was said last time. So students can go through really, really quickly and change anything they wish. Everybody gets the same questions, so unlike the bulk of the other questionnaires, there is no adaptive component to this. Everybody gets the same questionnaires because they're fairly short. I'll just change a couple just to see what happens. And what you get is an immediate rescore, overwriting the earlier information. And here they've come out as the mentor instead. So one of the questions is, how do you use personality in careers guidance? Well, Morrisby's perspective is that the most important thing with somebody is that they understand their strengths. And their strengths can include personality. And you will get situations where the aptitudes might say something different to the personality or the interests. And at that point, there's always a judgment about which is the strongest driver within the individual. That may be the personality. One of the things I'd caution against is using personality as the key driver for career decision making. So Morrisby's philosophy would be you have a body of knowledge which is built through education or experience, and then personality overlays that. Take, for example, an engineer. Somebody's body of knowledge is engineering. After that, they could go into technical research, product development, they could go into project management, they could go into sales, they could go into general management. And they may move through several of those in life, but they start off being an engineer. If you start off with a student at 15 who has the personality of a salesman, and you say, I think you should go into sales, they are never going to be selling complex engineering products or systems, which they might if they had a body of knowledge first. So Morrisby philosophy in general would be start off developing a body of knowledge, and then personality is overlaid on top of that and determines where you might take that. End of module.